I've never been a fan of the X-Men film series. I think that after First Class, everything went downhill. Even Days of Future Past was a letdown in my opinion, and X-Men Dark Phoenix is nothing different. Now I don't blame the actors. In fact, the movie has a great cast. McAvoy and Stewart are probably the only reason I will put myself through this. This is supposed to be the X-Men's last stand. Not last stand, but the last stand. But instead, they flop so badly, it makes a Magikarp splash looks impressive. For those that have watched the film, it should come as no surprise that the pacing was simply all over the place. I think the film was still fine for the first 30 minutes, but once Jean gets her Phoenix powers, people start to change and die because the film has to carry on. There were simply too many issues to name, but I'm just gonna name a handful which really didn't sit right by me. I feel bad for the non-comic book readers, because the only comprehension moviegoers will ever have about X-Men films is that they are all about Mystique, being a hero in the X-Men universe, and that Charles and Eric always have to be at odds. For this movie specifically, they had to make Magneto evil again, just so that Professor X and Magneto can stand on different sides of the battlefield. Sadly, this creative choice would leave many in the dark of the other and better storylines, more character intriguing ones from the comics, such as Decimation, Onslaught, and House of M. A few terrible movies later, I'm really very tired to see Magneto's character just outright assassinated for the sake of plot. Either that or his family just dies. Although for this film, Magneto wasn't really alone in the character assassination column, Beast joins that department pretty well. Sometimes the movie is so bad that it's hard to unpack or pinpoint what really went bad. Still, many things in the movie were very uncharacteristic of Beast. There's another glaring flaw in the movie that is highlighted by the supposed alternate ending that got changed. Jean Grey was simply too powerful. If you have such a strong character, how would you kill it? Well, Fox just solved it by making Jean Grey kill herself. The conclusion was too abrupt, so sudden, and you could almost tell the writers reached that stage of the movie and when, now what? The fight scene at the hotel, or rather outside the hotel, was another mess. Not the literal mess they made from the fight, but the metaphorical mess in the writing. For example, in one action sequence, Magneto impressively pulls out a train onto the ground level and seals the entire entrance to the building. Yet this action simply doesn't change the outcome. Kurt still enters the building via his teleportation abilities, which makes you wonder, what problem does it even present in the first place? The train. Team Professor X has Cyclops, Kurt, and Professor X himself. Professor X is already useless with the wheelchair, so the train at the door won't add much to the issue. Just some stairs and you already keep the man out. Cyclops can easily blast his way through, so... You see, the thing is, over the many years of X-Men films, one thing is slowly becoming apparent. Magneto is simply too powerful at times. The Last Stand was another example we can reference. We have a character that can control metal, and the best they could do was use him to move a bridge and throw some old cars. Not that it isn't a very impressive feat, but it's very hard from a storytelling point of view to ride him into a battle, yet not make it a 30-second thing. With so many cars in the hotel fight scene, Magneto can easily just trap Team Professor X under cars, instead of wasting his time and energy summoning a train. The time taken to hang on the suspense of the train while it emerges failed to mask the apparent writing flaw that the scriptwriters have while writing this film.
Where's Jean?
Where is she? Jean!
There are things that the film does right though, or at least it tries to do. Dark Phoenix scrutinizes Charles' decision and actions more so than they ever did, which is interesting. Because Charles holds a formidable power, he is only grounded by his own moral compass. The comics toyed with his moral compass a few times, such as the time where he buried the memories of the First Class X-Men, and in Ultimate Comics, which portrayed a darker version of Charles, who actually had feelings for Jean Grey. But Mystique's line about the X-Woman really throws me off, because it wasn't even the point of the whole conversation. And honestly, I'm really shocked to see this line make it to the final cut. The moral dilemma that Charles faces at times, the need to steer the X-Men in the direction and the vision he has for the team, yet faces his teammates' disagreement, is one of the topics that is very interesting and intriguing to tackle. because it can serve to provide the character with the much needed development and growth. It can show us what and how McAvoy Charles Xavier becomes the Stewart Charles Xavier. Now, I don't think that Charles' decision to cover up Jean's dad's decision was a wrong one. But it was at least an ambiguous one, and at the very least, controversial. Which should have been brought up again in the movie, not just as a cover-up, not just the decision to cover it up, but it should reflect the decisions and actions of Charles, how he answers to no one. And this will introduce, or could introduce, the idea of Charles stepping down, as he questions himself if he alone is fit to lead the X-Men. Charles as a goody-goody two-shoes was always boring to me, just like how Superman was to me. And I feel that when you explore the flaws in a seemingly perfect character, is when you start to put them in a different light, to make them interesting. For Charles, it is when you start to see him less as a wise sage, and more as a human, who is wrong at times too. For Superman, it was when you realize how superheroes are just a bad day from being a villain, like in Injustice. Days of Future Past gave us a Charles that wasn't too sure of himself, one that felt lost. And I felt that Dark Phoenix could have toyed with the idea of a Charles that was too sure of himself. The movie ended with a nice scene between Professor X and Magneto, no longer at odds. The chess scene is a nice nod to the various films preceding it. But where does this leave us for the X-Men and the school? Viewers are left to their open-ended answers. Rather than an open-ended happy ending like in X-Men Last Stand, I felt this was more of a lazy writing. The chess scene was great and all, but the movies never once made me feel that Charles was trying to save Eric. Mainly because I got too distracted by the terrible plot and flimsy character motivations for half the time. I will say this though, the train fight scene was magnificent in its own way, and I did like it. It was probably the only thing I liked in the movie. For so long, I wanted a proper fight scene, and the closest I got to was X-Men Last Stand, which has plenty of glaring flaws. And because of that, I was faced with a problem. The Last Stand was a terrible film, but to me as an audience, I liked the fight scene. The one where Wolverine tells everyone to hold the line, and it was an all out or nothing battle. I think that the fight scene on the train was action-packed enough for me, to make the fanboy in me scream, and it did a greater job than Days of Future Past, even with a smaller cast. Magneto's powers got showcased well though, like when he reinforced the door to Jean's train carriage, and crushed the entire other train of aliens. We even get mini team-ups between characters, like when Magneto shouted for Beast to help Storm. The death in this scene for the side characters we barely got to know was swept away pretty fast though, which was another flaw of the scene. We barely got to know and connect with Magneto's newfound allies, and suddenly, they were literally out of the picture. But with my lower expectation, I would say this was the best part of the film.
Who are you?
The better question is, who are you?
Something's happening to me. When I lose control, bad things happen. But it feels good.
That power destroyed everything it ever came into contact with. Until you.
Now let's talk about the characters, cause boy is there a lot to talk about. Cyclops. I didn't like this portrayal of Cyclops. I felt that this Cyclops character felt flat at times. The actor tries his best, probably, but as far as I can tell, he just can't sell anything outside of the Cyclops Jean scene. Even when he was talking about not killing Jean, to Magneto or to Beast, it felt as flat as a kid opting not to have chocolate chips on his ice cream. Beast. Beast's action made no sense, and he's a victim of blatant character assassination. Nicholas Hoult has been a great actor for the previous films, and I like him for Beast, especially in First Class. I felt he really nailed it, but in this movie, for some reason or another, he felt flat, similar to Cyclops. Like when he was talking to Charles in the mansion after Raven's death. When he said, "Say it, Charles, say it, just say it," it sounded more like a kid asking another kid to apologize instead of a traumatized adult talking to the other only remaining member of the First Class X-Men team. Now, his actions to kill Jean may not have made sense, but it could have worked. We are talking about a character who has just lost a loved one, someone he really cared about, after he convinced himself and her that this was the life they have and deserve. Guilt could have driven Beast to do stupid things, but the only problem I have with this portrayal of Beast is the way he was redeemed. Surely you can let him go all mad and bloodthirsty, but him coming back to his senses was all just a "this isn't what Raven wanted" from Scott, of all people. Now this is how I would have made the scene more powerful. Let Charles be the one to pull Beast back to his senses. Remind Beast that Charles himself is suffering too, except that he doesn't hide the pain with revenge, or try to ease it with killing. Let Charles remind Magneto how Magneto has led his life filled with revenge, like how Magneto himself has said. And that this is Magneto's chance to walk on a different road, unlike his experience with Shaw and Apocalypse. To prove to himself and to Charles that Magneto is indeed the better man. Maybe not a better man than Charles, but a better man than his former murderous self. Maybe have a line about how people can lose their way and not be gone forever. Sounds familiar?
You still believe?
Just because someone stumbles, loses their way, it doesn't mean they're lost forever. Sometimes we all need a little help.
Then end the scene with Charles telling them that they are wrong and he won't give up on them, because humans fail from time to time, including him, and that he was wrong. Now, I may not have described the perfect scene, but think about how powerful this moment could be. But instead, we are given a recurring comment and a lackluster performance from Cyclops. Quicksilver. Quicksilver is like the guy that does sufficiently enough work at the start of the project to leave a good impression, and then doesn't contribute for the entire academic semester, and then swoops in to score a few last points at the final moment. Professor X and Magneto. Their journey along the years should have been reflected better in the films, and it's really sad to see the film series end just like this. Charles and Magneto's friendship or rivalry is very complicated, to say the least, and I really don't think that the movie franchise does it justice. Each film, like I mentioned, forcefully puts Magneto at a place where he can oppose Charles just so they can fight. Even X-Men The Last Stand did a better job at handling the Charles-Magneto dynamic. Many scenes I disliked in the film were actually salvaged by these two characters' presence. For example, in the kitchen scene, I could actually see the hurt in McAvoy's eyes as he portrays Charles. And when Beast tells Magneto about Raven's death, Fassbender does a great job in portraying an appropriate reaction combining shock and grief. I feel that both mutant pioneers deserve at least one more emotional scene together, similar to one I previously described, for fans like me to feel closure. And if you are lucky enough to have another movie similar to Days of Future Past, they can stand side by side again. Jean Grey. Now, I started liking this Jean Grey a bit more than the previous movie. I think Sophie Turner does a great job with what she was given. The scenes where Jean were confused or scared, Turner portrayed the emotions pretty well. Or at least that was what I felt. But like I mentioned and complained, Jean Grey as a character was written really poorly. Not just the scared of the Phoenix power part, but the ending part. Mistake. I never liked the concept of her being a hero and a literal hero in the eyes of everyone at Charles' school. Every reason and attempt to include her in the film since First Class felt forced and unneeded, especially her romance with Beast and Eric. All in all, an overused and overglorified character in the movie franchise. I thought the pen to describe a gift was a line that was perfectly crafted. Alongside the other romantic lines, I felt that these were probably the best lines and scenes in the movie. Although the scenes between Scott and Jean were a little bit cheesy, I felt it was pretty appropriate. There were many lines that fell flat though, like how Jean does the "my feelings make me stronger and not weaker," but that's just my opinion. There were also many missed opportunities for McAvoy's Professor X to repeat the lines that his future self gave him during Days of Future Past, Like how just because someone stumbles and loses their way doesn't mean they are lost forever. Logan's "Your Best Is Enough" scene from Days of Future Past goes down the drain too, as Charles seemingly forgotten this conversation that they had, which supposedly sparked the start and creation of his current X-Men team.
You alright?
Getting there.
Whatever happens today, I need you to promise me something. You've looked into my mind and you've seen a lot of bad, but you've seen the good too. The X-Men. Promise me you'll find us. Use your power, bring us together. Guide us, lead us. Storm, Scott, Jean. Remember those names. There's so many of us. We will need you, Professor.
I'll do my best.
Your best is enough. Trust me.
They should have Charles tell Jean that there was a man who spoke greatly of her, and explain to Raven of why he created the X-Men, why it was named the X-Men, and that he, as a human, could only have done his best, even when he was not sure of himself. Dark Phoenix had plenty of problems, but also at the same time, a ton of potential. This movie could have been about our beloved characters, failing, falling, regressing, but finding the strength to stand up and walk again, to walk on the right path. Think about it. Charles clouded by his ego, Beast clouded by rage, Jean clouded by confusion, Magneto returning to his villainous tendencies due to grief. But they each find the strength to move on and admit their errors, even the seemingly perfect Charles. This episode and growth would really ease the character well into making him the Patrick Stewart version of Charles Xavier. Not that all of this will do any good in the face of that many continuity errors. In the end, Dark Phoenix is just a movie that symbolizes the X-Men franchise pretty well. Tons of great ideas and potential, stellar filmography and acting, but just outright terrible scripting and pacing. Now to the production team's defense and credit, red tape issues, light rights, and creativity differences may have played a role in all this mess. But at the end of the day, it really failed to deliver what it could have been. To those wondering, yeah, I would really very much like to watch The Last Stand more than The Dark Phoenix. The characters were probably my favourite and most hated part of the film, and it really sucks to have to bid farewell to them in such a sad way, to the characters I grew up watching. But I suppose that many movies into the franchise, I should have gotten numb with disappointment by now. Well, 3 out of 10, thanks for nothing.